I was raised to believe that leaving Islam was worse than death, but I died anyway, and what I saw shattered everything. My name is Hafsat. I am 32 years old, and I was born into a powerful Saudi family where obedience was not optional. It was the air we breathed from the moment we could speak. I grew up surrounded by wealth, guarded by silence, and shaped by rules that were never meant to be questioned. From the outside, my life looked like perfection. Marble floors, silk garment servants who bowed without looking into my eyes, and a name that carried honor wherever it was spoken. But inside me, there was a quiet emptiness that I could never explain. I prayed, I fasted, I obeyed, I memorized verses until my tongue moved without thought. Yet every time I raised my hands in prayer, it felt like I was reaching into nothing, like my voice disappeared. Before it ever reached heaven, I feared God, but I never felt Him love, was never part of the equation. Only duty, only expectation, only the constant awareness that I could fail at any moment, and that failure would cost me everything I learned early, that questions were dangerous, that doubt was weakness, that curiosity could destroy a life, so I buried everything I felt deep inside me, and I smiled like the perfect daughter, the perfect woman, the perfect believer. But at night, when the palace fell silent and even the guards outside my door stood still, I would stare into the darkness and whisper words I never dared to say out loud. Why do I feel so alone if God is near? Why does my heart feel like it is suffocating inside a faith that promises peace? I tried to silence those thoughts. I tried to pray harder to believe, stronger to become better, but something inside me kept breaking slowly, quietly, like a crack spreading through glass. And then one day my body followed where my soul had already begun to collapse. I was taken into surgery. Something routine, something controlled. Something that should not have ended in death, but it did. My heart stopped, and for 48 hours my body lay lifeless, while something beyond anything I had ever known began to unfold. And before I tell you what happened in that place between life and death, I need you to understand this. If you are listening to my voice right now, and something inside you is searching, something inside you is questioning, do not ignore it. Help this truth reach others. Like, share, comment, subscribe, because someone somewhere is trapped in the same silence I lived in, and they are waiting for a voice to break through the darkness, just like I was. I grew up in a palace that looked like paradise to the world, but inside it felt like a place where silence had more power than words. Every corridor echoed with expectation, every room carried an invisible weight, and every breath I took felt measured. My father was a man of authority. His presence alone could silence an entire gathering, and my mother existed like a shadow beside him, careful, composed, never daring to challenge anything that had already been decided for her, or for me from the time I was a child. I was taught that obedience was survival, and fear was faith. I remember being 6 years old, sitting on a cold marble floor, reciting verses while my tutor watched me closely, her eyes sharp, waiting for a mistake. When I stumbled over a word, she struck the floor beside me with a stick, not to injure me, but to remind me that perfection was not optional. I learned quickly that mistakes brought consequences and questions brought something worse, silence and isolation. There were nights when I cried quietly into my pillow, asking God to forgive me for things I did not understand, afraid that even my thoughts were being recorded somewhere against me. I was told that Allah sees everything, hears everything, judges everything, but no one ever told me that He loved me. Not in a way I could feel, not in a way that made my heart rest. Instead, I felt watched, weighed, measured constantly, afraid that I was never enough. I remember once gathering the courage to ask why fear was the center of everything. Why love was never mentioned, the way I heard it described in stories from other places. My tutor froze her face, tightening as if I had said something forbidden. She leaned closer to me and whispered, "You must never ask that again," and in that moment I understood something without her needing to explain it. Truth was not something we were allowed to explore. It was something we were expected to accept without question. That day, something small but powerful shifted inside me, a quiet realization that if truth could not be questioned, then maybe it was not as strong as I had been told. But fear quickly buried that thought, like it always did. As I grew older, I became what they wanted. Disciplined, respectful, silent. I learned how to hide my emotions, how to agree without understanding, how to exist without truly living. But inside me there was a growing emptiness, a hunger for something I could not name, something real, something that did not rely on fear to hold me in place. And one night as I lay awake staring into the darkness, the silence around me felt heavier than ever, and a thought slipped into my mind so clearly it startled me. What if everything I have been taught is not the truth? As I grew older, the walls around me did not loosen. They tightened, expectations followed me like shadows, and every conversation about my future sounded less like a choice and more like a command. Proposals began arriving from families with influence and power. Men I had never met discussed as if they already belonged to me. My role was simple: to accept, to honor, to preserve the image that had been built long before I was born. I smiled when they expected me to smile, and I lowered my gaze when they expected humility. But inside, something restless had begun to awaken. The questions I buried as a child returned stronger, sharper. Refusing to be silenced, this time late at night when the palace slept, I began searching quietly, my phone hidden beneath my blanket, the glow of the screen lighting my face as I typed questions I would never dare to speak out. Aloud, I read interpretations from different scholars, and instead of clarity, I found confusion, opinions that contradicted each other, explanations that avoided the questions I was asking. And for the first time, I felt something dangerous. Not just doubt, but awareness. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing that certainty was not as solid as I had believed. Then something happened that shook me deeper than anything I had read. A close friend of mine, someone gentle, someone sincere, asked a question during a private gathering. She did not raise her voice. She did not challenge with anger. She simply asked why certain teachings seemed inconsistent. The room fell silent. The air shifted, and within days she was gone. No explanation, no farewell. Her name was no longer spoken, and I understood the message clearly. Truth was not something to pursue. It was something to fear, but instead of pushing me back into obedience, it pushed me further into searching if truth was so fragile that it required silence. Then what was it hiding? One night, with my heart pounding so loudly, I thought it would wake someone, I did something I had never imagined I would do. I downloaded a Bible app, my fingers trembling as if I was committing a crime. I hid it carefully among other apps and stared at the icon for a long moment, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might mean if I did. But something inside me refused to turn away. I tapped the screen and opened to a random page, not knowing where to begin. My eyes scanned the words, slowly, uncertainly, and then I read something that made my breath catch: words about love, about forgiveness, about a man who spoke with authority yet carried compassion. And as I read, about Jesus. For the very first time in my life, something inside me shifted. Not fear, not pressure, but something unfamiliar, something warm, something alive. And I realized in that quiet, hidden moment that I was standing at the edge of something that could change everything. I tried to forget him. I truly did. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more, something I would outgrow like a passing thought. But the words I had read would not leave me. They followed me into my prayers, into my silence, into the spaces where I used to feel nothing, and suddenly everything felt different. I began returning to that hidden app late at night, my hands steady now, but my heart still racing, as if someone might burst into my room at any moment and take everything away from me. I read slowly at first, then with urgency, devouring every passage I could find about Jesus. The way he spoke, the way he touched people, the way he forgave even those who hurt him. It confused me deeply because it did not match anything I had been taught. Faith had always been about fear, about obedience, about never stepping outside the lines, but this was different. This felt like love, and I did not know what to do with that. I remember reading the words, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And I had to stop because tears filled my eyes before I even understood why I was weary. I had always been weary, but I had never admitted it, not even to myself. I closed the app quickly as guilt rushed in like a wave. "What are you doing?" I whispered to myself. "This is wrong. This is betrayal." But even as I said those words, I knew something inside me disagreed. I began watching sermons in secret, the volume barely audible, my ear pressed close to my phone as voices spoke about a God who knew you personally, who loved you without conditions, who did not demand perfection before offering grace. It sounded impossible, it sounded dangerous, but it also sounded true, and that terrified me more than anything. Because if it was true, then everything I had built my life on was incomplete. I would close the video suddenly whenever I heard footsteps outside my door, my body tense, my breath shallow as I waited for the sound to pass. Then I would return to the screen, unable to stay away. The more I tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. It was not loud, it was not forceful, it was gentle, persistent, like someone knocking quietly on a door they knew would eventually open one night. I could not carry the weight of it anymore. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dark, the silence pressing in around me, and for the first time in my life I spoke without rehearsing, without fear of saying the wrong thing. I whispered into the emptiness. "God, if you are real, if you can hear me, if this Jesus is more than what I have been told, then show me the truth I do not want to." live in fear anymore. I do not want to follow something just because I was born into it. I need to know what is real. And as the words left my lips, something shifted in the atmosphere, something I could not see but I could feel. And in that quiet moment I sensed that my prayer had not disappeared into silence. It had been heard, and deep inside me a realization began to form that whatever was coming next would not leave my life the same ever again. The morning of my surgery arrived with a strange stillness that I could not explain. The palace felt quieter than usual, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I was told it was a minor procedure, something routine, something that would be over in a few hours. But deep inside me there was a weight I could not ignore, like a whisper, warning me that this day would not end the way it began. My mother kissed my forehead gently, her eyes avoiding mine, as if she sensed something she could not name. My father stood at a distance, composed as always, offering a brief nod instead of comfort. I was escorted into the hospital, surrounded by security and silence. The sterile smell filled my lungs as doctors moved with practiced precision. Their voices calm, their expressions controlled. I changed into the hospital gown, my hands trembling slightly as I lay on. The cold bed staring up at the ceiling lights that seemed too bright, too distant. A nurse adjusted the equipment beside me and smiled reassuringly. "You will be fine," she said, but her words felt hollow against the unease rising in my chest as they wheeled me into the operating room. The world around me blurred into flashes of light and metallic sounds. Instruments clinking softly, machines humming steadily. I remember the anesthesiologist speaking to me, asking me to count backwards, his voice fading as I reached 8, 7, 6, and then everything went dark. But it was not the kind of darkness I had known before. It was deeper, heavier, like falling into a void that had no end. I became aware in a way that did not make sense. I could not feel my body, I could not hear the machines. But I knew I existed, floating suspended in a space where time did not move. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming stillness that felt almost unnatural. Then suddenly something shifted. A faint glow appeared in the distance, barely visible at first, like a distant star in an endless night. And as I focused on it, the light began to grow brighter, warmer, drawing me toward it without force, without fear. I felt myself moving, though I had no body, no form, just awareness being pulled toward something I did not understand. And with that movement came a sensation I had never experienced before. Peace, not the absence of trouble, but a presence, something alive surrounding me, filling every part of my being. The closer I moved toward the light, the stronger it became, wrapping around me like an embrace I did not know I had needed my entire life. And then I heard it, a voice clear, gentle, and unmistakably real, calling my name, Hafsat. The sound echoed through me, not around me, as if it came from within and beyond. At the same time, no one had ever said my name like that. Not with that kind of knowing. Not with that kind of love. I was not afraid, I was not confused. I was drawn forward, completely surrendered to whatever this was. And as the light surrounded me fully and the voice called again, I realized with a certainty that shook me to my core, I was not alone in this place between life and death, and someone was waiting for me just beyond the light. As the light did not blind me, it welcomed me. It surrounded me like something alive, something aware, and as I moved closer I felt every fear I had ever carried begin to fall away. Not slowly, but completely, as if it had never truly belonged to me in the first place. And then I saw him not as a distant figure, not as an idea, but as a presence so real that everything I had ever known before felt like shadows. Compared to this moment I knew who he was. Before a single word was spoken, it was Jesus, the same Jesus I had been reading about in secret, the same name I had whispered in uncertainty. And now he stood before me, not forcing, not demanding, simply present. And I felt myself fall, not out of obligation, but because something inside me recognized him instantly. Every hidden thought, every silent question, every tear I had cried in the darkness, it was all Abba known to him, and yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only a depth of love that I had no language to describe. I tried to speak, but no words came. Instead, I felt everything pouring out of me, the confusion, the fear, the years of pretending, and he did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply allowed me to be seen, completely seen in a way I had never experienced before. And then he spoke, "Hafsat, you were searching, and I was with you even when you did not know." My voice was not loud, yet it carried a weight that filled everything around me. I saw moments from my life unfold like scenes I had forgotten. Nights when I felt alone, times when I questioned, times when I cried quietly, believing no one heard me. And in every moment he was there, not distant, not absent, but present, watching, waiting, not forcing himself into my life, but responding to every Sincere search of my heart, I realized then that I had never truly been alone, even in the silence, even in the fear. He had been there, and then he showed me something deeper, not with images alone, but with understanding. I saw how fear had shaped my faith, how control had replaced truth, how obedience had been used to silence the very questions that could have led me to him sooner. And yet there was no anger in him, no accusation, only truth, clear, undeniable truth. And then he said, "My love is not built on fear. I came so that you may know me not as a distant authority, but as the one who sees you, who calls you by name, who gives you life." I felt something break inside me, something that had been locked away for years, and in its place came a peace so overwhelming that I could not hold it back. I wanted to stay there. I did not want to return to the world. I had left behind the expectations, the pressure, the fear. None of it mattered in that moment. All I wanted was to remain in that presence where I was fully known and fully loved. And then he gave me a choice: return and speak what you have seen, or remain here in peace. The words settled deeply within me, and for the first time I understood that truth would cost me everything, but staying would mean leaving behind those who were still searching like I once was. And in that moment I knew my answer even before I spoke it. When I opened my eyes, the world felt unfamiliar, not because anything had changed around me, but because everything inside me had shifted so completely that nothing looked the same. The ceiling above me, the steady rhythm of machines, the soft movement of nurses, it was all ordinary, yet I felt as if I had returned from somewhere beyond reality. My chest rose slowly as I took in my first breath, aware of it in a way I had never been before, alive. Not just physically, but deeply awake. My mother was beside me, her eyes red from crying, her hand gripping mine as if she feared I would disappear again. Voices filled the room, relief, gratitude, whispers of miracle, but I could barely focus on them because something greater had taken hold of me. The peace I had felt in that place had not left me. It remained steady, unshaken, like a quiet presence resting within my soul. The fear that once controlled every thought, every action, it was gone, completely replaced by a certainty I could not explain. I knew what I had seen, I knew who I had encountered, and no one could convince me otherwise. Days passed, and I recovered physically, but my spirit had already been restored in a way that no medicine could achieve. I began to see everything differently. The prayers I once recited felt empty. Now, the words no longer carried meaning, because I had experienced something real, something alive. I found myself returning to the Bible, not in secret fear, but in quiet hunger, reading with a clarity I had never known before. Each verse felt like it was speaking directly to me, confirming what I had experienced, strengthening what had already been planted inside my heart. I reached out carefully to people online, believers who spoke of Jesus with the same peace I carried, and for the first time I felt connected not by obligation, but by truth. But the more I changed, the more noticeable it became: my silence during certain prayers, my hesitation in conversations, my unwillingness to repeat words I no longer believed. It did not take long before the questions began, subtle at first, then sharper, more direct. My family watched me closely, their concern slowly turning into suspicion, and one evening everything shifted. My father sent for me. His voice carried authority as always, but there was something else beneath it, something heavier, something unsettled. I walked into his study, the room dimly lit, the air thick with tension. He looked at me in silence for a moment, as if searching for something in my face, something that confirmed his fears. And then he spoke slowly, deliberately. "What has happened to you?" The question lingered in the air, and in that moment I understood that the truth I now carried could no longer remain hidden. They brought scholars to speak with me, men whose voices carried authority and judgment, their eyes sharp, their words sharper. Every sentence meant to correct, control, intimidate, pressure me back into the life I had once known. They spoke of verses, they recited warnings, they described consequences. I felt the weight of my family's expectations pressing down on me like a physical force. My mother's tears, my father's disappointment, the anger simmering beneath his composed exterior. It was everywhere, and yet inside me there was a calm I had never known before. I remembered the light I had seen, the presence I had felt, the voice that had called my name, and every word of fear they spoke bounced harmlessly against the certainty I now carried. I was alone, yet I was not afraid. I was isolated, yet I was not lonely, because I knew I was held by something. A greater something that had seen me even when no one else had. I felt their attempts to manipulate, to frighten, to shame me, like a storm passing over calm waters. It could not touch the depth of peace that had taken root in me. They demanded I recant, that I deny what I had experienced, that I abandon the truth that had saved me. I could feel the weight of their gaze, the pressure to surrender everything I had come to know, the security, the status, the family ties, all of it dangling before me like a choice I was supposed to accept in order to be safe. But safety had never brought peace, fear had never brought truth, and now that I had glimpsed the real, I could not turn back even as tears threatened to fall, even as my heart ached with the cost of what I was about to do. I stood firm. I repeated silently every truth I had learned, every moment of love, every moment of clarity, every promise I had seen and felt. The room seemed to tighten around me until finally my father spoke one last time, his voice heavy with finality. "Hafsat, you must choose us, or you must choose him." Those words hung in the air like a guillotine ready to fall. Everything I had known, everything I had been taught, everything I had been expected to protect was on one side, and the truth that had saved my soul was on the other. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt the presence I had come to know steady me, remind me that I was not alone, that the choice I made was mine, and mine alone, that the peace I had been given could not be taken. And when I opened my eyes, I knew I could not turn back, even if it meant losing everything I had ever held dear. I could not abandon the truth that had found me. I took a deep breath and spoke my first words aloud with a calm. I did not know I possessed my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart, despite the anger and disappointment radiating from every person in the room. I said, "I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in his love and his truth. I will follow him even if it costs me everything." The room fell silent as if my words had pulled the air out of the walls. My father's face went pale. My mother's tears froze on her cheeks. The scholars whispered among themselves, trying to find something to counter the certainty in my eyes. But there was nothing I could be swayed by. Nothing could undo what I had seen, what I had felt, what I had been given. I told them everything, the visions, the light, the voice that called my name, the overwhelming peace, the truths I had learned about fear and love, about obedience. And freedom, I did not speak to shame them or to confront them. I spoke simply to testify what I had experienced, to declare that my soul now belonged to a different king than the one they had tried to shape me under. Their attempts to argue, to threaten, to remind me of what I could lose, fell flat against the armor of certainty that Jesus had placed over my heart. I saw the cracks in their control. As I spoke, the fear they tried to use to bind me powerless against the freedom I now carried. I left the room after I finished my testimony without shouting, without rebellion, but with quiet, unwavering conviction. I walked through corridors that had once confined me, that had once dictated every movement, every breath, and I felt a lightness I had never known, as if the walls themselves could no longer hold me. I was no longer the princess defined by status. And by fear, by expectation, I was Hafsat, the daughter of God, alive in his truth, uncertain of what the future would hold, but free beyond measure. I stepped outside into the sunlight, and for the first time in my life, I breathed without fear. I walked without chains, and though the world I had known had been left behind, I carried something far greater, the unshakable certainty that my life now belonged to the one who had called me by name and would never let me go. Yeah, I found myself in a place I never could have imagined, a quiet refuge, far from the palace, far from the expectations, far from the fear that had ruled my life here. I met others who had been broken, lost, searching, and yet somehow they had found the same love that had found me. We shared meals, we prayed together, we laughed and cried together. For the first time I understood community, not the hollow kind built on appearances, but one built on truth, on grace, on Jesus Christ. My heart, once heavy with silence and fear, now felt expansive, alive, and unafraid. I studied the Bible with others who guided me gently, helping me understand passages that had once terrified me, showing me how God's promises were not meant to oppress, but to set free. I learned to pray boldly, to worship without hesitation, to rejoice even when the memory of my old life tugged at me, and slowly, the guilt that had been my constant companion began to dissolve. I realized that leaving the palace, leaving my family's expectations, leaving everything I had been taught to believe in was not betrayal. It was obedience to a higher truth. I began sharing my story carefully at first, whispering it to those who, like me, were quietly searching, afraid to ask the questions that haunted them. Then, as my confidence grew, I spoke louder. Online communities, secret gatherings, even letters to those trapped in fear. I shared everything. I told them about the light, the voice, the peace that could not be taken away. I told them that no fear could compare to the freedom that comes from knowing Jesus, that the love of God is stronger than shame, stronger than tradition, stronger than anything that tries to hold the heart captive. Sometimes I think of the palace. The life I left behind, the luxury, the power, the certainty of control, and I do not miss it because what I have now cannot be measured in jewels or titles. I have peace. I cannot earn love. I cannot deserve freedom. I cannot buy. I have Jesus, and in him I have life beyond fear, life beyond chains, life beyond even death. To anyone watching this, especially those born into a life of rules and fear, know this: the truth you are searching for is real. The questions that terrify you are meant to lead you, and the love waiting for you is deeper than anything you have known. Follow that light, even if it costs you everything. Because in the end, what you gain is life itself. Life, eternal life in Christ. I am Hafsat, and I am free, and you can be too.